Welcome. My name is Chris Chappell. I'm the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology, as well as the Director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies here at Loyola Marymount University. And I want to welcome our online community and our in-house community and remind the students of Professor Zoe Slatoff to sign in with Gabby in the back before you leave the room. So Gabby will.
Yeah, so Dr. Slatoff's class.
Yeah, your presence. So welcome. And I'm so delighted on multiple fronts and multiple levels to participate in this event today. In 1969, as a young teenager, I saw Tina Turner teach Mick Jagger how to dance on the stage of Madison Square Garden. And she was the soundtrack to our lives back in the day. And she survived and she thrived. And those of us that have seen that wonderful movie, What's Love Got to Do with It? How did she manage? We're going to learn that today. We're going to learn about the power of meditation and chanting to transform, the power for that skill and that commitment to bring flourishing. And our speaker today is also right up there with Tina Turner in terms of great story. And he hails originally from New Orleans. His family was very adversely affected by Katrina some 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And he found his way through the new school, didn't quite work, ended up as a yoga teacher here in Los Angeles. And at the advice of scholar colleagues in New York City from Columbia, he knocked on my door and said, I was told to talk to you. And he would guest in my classes talking about his experiences with Buddhism. And I brought him over to our folks who said, he's got to bring that GPA up a little bit. So he did good work in Japanese and East Asian cultures at Santa Monica College, graduated from LMU as the top theology student, the top Kinte student, and lo and behold, went straight into the doctoral program at Stanford and completed in record time, taught 1 year in Dartmouth, fulfilling his heartfelt desire to be part of the Ivy League, and then realizing this was not for him, and then coming back to the West, where he is currently assistant professor of religious studies at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. So without further introduction, I just am so delighted to welcome Ralph Craig back to LMU.
Have a religious biography written of me. First chapter will do it. But I want to thank you all for having me back at my alma mater. I see so many faces that I know. I want to acknowledge 3 people that are here, right? Dr. Chris Chappell, Maureen Chappell, great thinker, scholar, compassionate in her own right. Dr. Kim Harris, right? All people who helped me out tremendously when I was here. And one thing that Chris didn't say was when I knocked on his door, he invited me that day. You were having lunch with the Doshis at the Indian restaurant around the corner.
Yeah.
And so Chris didn't know me, I didn't know him, and he said, well, why don't you join us for lunch? And so from that moment forward, Chris has helped me tremendously. So I'm so happy to be back, and thank you for inviting me and all that you've done. My subject today is, of course, Tina Turner and the secret combination, right? Tina Turner and Black Buddhism. So I'm going to first share. I think it might be impossible in Zoom world not say that you're going to share your screen before you share. Let's see. This will work.
Yeah.
We will see what happens. So the secret combination, Tina Turner and Black Buddhism. And we should always acknowledge where we are, right? It's Monday, October 21st. We're all alive, we're all here. And this is the book that I wrote about Tina Turner, Dancing My Dreams, Spiritual Biography of Tina Turner. With a foreword by Dr. Jan Willis, who I was actually introduced to her work through Dr. Kim Harris, right? So very much this book is indebted to LMU. And this is what we will do, right? We will go over who Tina Turner is, for those who don't know who she is. We will watch a clip of Tina Turner performing live. We will go over her religious life, some of the history and doctrines in brief of SGI Nichiren Buddhism. Then we will look at what Turner herself emphasizes as her distinctive teachings. And then it'll be your turn, right? Q&A time. So who is the queen of rock and roll, Tina Turner? Born in Nutbush, Tennessee, right, in 1939, and died last year in Kuznach, Switzerland. I've had the great opportunity to meet her a number of times. I know her family very well. I spend every September, part of every September, with her niece, and I've been to her home in Switzerland, though I was not allowed on the grounds for some strange reason. Don't you know who I am? But she was, of course, an author, an entertainer, and a teacher. And that's the argument that I'm going to make in this talk, that by the end of her life, she had become a Black Buddhist teacher, right? She was formerly a member of the Ike and Tina Turner Review. She was married to Ike Turner from 1962 to 1978. And in that marriage, of course, they made rock and roll history as they forged a distinctive genre for themselves as rock and soul artists. And Tina Turner came to be called the queen of rock and roll. Now, for some people, that is a strange thing, right? Particularly the way that rock music is thought of, it's told as a white male history primarily. And yet the moniker rock and roll was first ever applied to a Black woman, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, right? So rock and roll, the history of rock and roll is indebted to, intertwined with Black culture and Black religion specifically. So in this marriage, in this review, she made history, but there was, of course, a dark side. Has anybody here seen What's Love Got to Do with It? Has anybody seen the HBO documentary, Tina? Oh, yeah. Oh, I see it. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, Tina Turner's life with Ike Turner was very difficult, to say the least. Ike Turner was suffered from schizophrenia and other things, and he was a very abusive man and kept Tina Turner under control, such that many people in the music business didn't know her, right? They knew her on stage, but they couldn't know her privately because Ike Turner kept her largely away from the public. But then she broke away from him, a story which we will talk about shortly. And she recounts her own story in 3 books, right? I, Tina, her 1986 autobiography, My Love Story, her 2018 update on that, and Happiness Becomes You, which is a memoir about her life as a Buddhist and kind of self-help styled guides and tips, right? Her best known songs, River Deep Mountain High, some of you may not have heard. The song Proud Mary, many people are usually familiar with. The song that goes, rolling, rolling, right? That's Tina Turner. And the song Nutbush City Limits, What's Love Got to Do with It, also the title of her biopic. And probably the song that at this point, she's probably most well known for, if not What's Love Got to Do with It, The Best, came out in 1989. Now, what I will play for you is Tina Turner at the top of her game. In this concert, for context, she is 60 years old, performing for 80,000 people on a tour that was the highest grossing tour of that year, in the year 2000, beating out NSYNC, Britney Spears, and other such people. So she remained to the end of her life a tremendous concert draw. And I'm gonna make a series of arguments about this performance after. Have any of you ever seen Tina? I know Chris has seen Tina live. Has anybody else seen Tina live? You see, when?
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, with 19, that tells you. Probably 1980, no, 91, 92.
Okay, so you saw her in 92 is with that.
All right.
Probably the Was Love live
Exactly.
tour. Yeah. And I saw her live in 2008 in Newark, New Jersey at Prudential Center. I got to meet her there. But this is some years before that, in 2000. So hopefully it'll work, and then we will go.
Come to me, wild, wild.
From one perspective, right, performances like these made Turner one of the most successful live acts of the 20th and 21st century. For example, by most industry accounts, she has sold more concert tickets than any solo performer in history, right, in recorded history anyway. One of her concerts, a 1988 tour stop in Rio in Brazil, on her Break Every Rule tour, put her in the Guinness Book of Records for largest paying crowd ever assembled for a solo performer when she was 50 years old, right? 188,000 people on one night. She still holds this record today for women. Her record sales in excess of 200 million and beyond, right? And furthermore. But from another perspective, and arguably the most important perspective for Turner herself, her performances and indeed her success was rooted in the foundation of her religious practices. Expect the unexpected. So Turner said this, right? I have chanted and prayed before each show, focused on the happiness of each person who came to see me. I visualized my audience and prayed that I could be whoever each person needed me to be that day in order to inspire their dreams, invigorate their hope, and recharge their souls. And here's Turner chanting on the same day in 1984, when she found out that her record, What's Love Got to Do With It, had gone to #1. On the same day that she was offered a part in the movie Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, right? This is her chanting that night in New York City. So this shows you, right, that each moment in her life and career, right, exclamated, if you will, by her practice of chanting. And Turner herself describes her practice in an interview. Probably one of the first videos I would show Dr. Harris. Everybody who knows me is have to watch this video.
Your faith.
My faith.
You convert, or you became?
I'm converted to Buddhist.
What took you to that?
Change. The practice in the early stages of it, when it was introduced to me, was that it could change your life if that's what you were looking for. And at that time, that is definitely what I wanted.
Had you broken up at that time?
No, I was still there. It was actually the shot in the movie right after I had taken the medicine that makes you sleep. And
Took a lot of it.
Yeah. And when I woke up, I thought, well, okay, this is my life. I accept. And then the message came, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, that it could change your life. And I had to teach myself because I didn't have the freedom to actually go to meetings or for people to come to me. So I remember working really hard, and I'm happy that I did it that way because it was on my own that I really struggled for it, and it changed my life.
And the message came from where?
There were a group of people called the Nichiren Shoshu organization. President Ikeda was the president from Japan that organized the gift to us. And the members were older people, older members that had been chanting for a length of time, that had people to door, something like, what do you call it? Avon.
Buddhism is also a way of living, isn't it, right?
Yes.
It's more than a faith.
Yes. Actually, what happened, how I view it is that it is something that one depends on. Like, I think, like, I need my refrigerator, I need the clothing on my back, I need shelter, and chanting takes care of that spiritual side, that subconscious mind that I tap into. My reality is God is giving us the faith, but we have to find it, we have to work on it to find the God within us, that, let's say, that coin. And when you chant, when you get into the rhythm, the sound.
Is the chant to God?
It is to the coin, let's say, within us, which is the subconscious mind.
Now, with the way you sing, you must be the #1 Buddhist chanter in the world. If there's a God, he's saying, pray again.
He said he heard me.
Chant again. I mean, you're getting chanting for free, right? The angels are getting you for nothing.
You should make a joke.
I'm not making a joke. Okay. Yes, you can, because Buddhists can laugh. I've met many Buddhists. They laugh a lot at themselves, right? Well, good faiths can always laugh at themselves, right?
They're strong believers.
Can you do a chant?
Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's what I do.
That's it?
Oh, it's that, but then there are 5 prayers. But
Can you give me a little variation? I like that.
Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, 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 Myoho Renge Kyo, Hopen Bon Tai Ni. Niti say sanju dhammayan tu niki go javis jo puji ye den muryo go ji ye manangai nanyo veda jo manak di buryo puno ji jo we chaga purusa danda naga danman naga mojo jo purudanya jo purumuryo jo imyo jo simyo jo fuman jo jo jin ten pi so wu zui ki jo sa di shu nangai jo res go jo puzi ra ju ju i nan ju ju hi yu ho en kong yo mu shu ho pen en do shu jo jo we jo dak jo we chaga chicken armas gai guzas naraji ken go ra jen dan muryo mo gai rik mo jo we san jo gai da san ma jen yo mo sa Jojo is that me so who watch us no run no juju from the Jojo content do not make a judgment there is your content more your move these who would do and so on. That's one of the first prayers. You're turning red.
Shabbos is it's the eve of my holiday.
So as Tina herself explains, right, the practice took her out of a dark time. What she was referencing with the medicine that makes her sleep is that she had tried to take her life a number of times. But the last time she tried to take her life, which was in 1968, where she woke up in the hospital and she said, as she said to herself, and I interviewed people who knew her at the time, and they said She woke up and when she got back from the hospital, she said, "This is my life and I accept. So I will have to find another way to get out, right? It's because I tried death and it didn't work, right? So I need another way." And eventually, then she is introduced to Buddhism. But what I want to highlight in this video is that in her explanation of Buddhism, you can hear three strands. Obviously the Buddhism piece, right? She's chanting and all of that, but she mentions God, right? Buddhism not typically thought of as a theistic tradition, right? Now for the students in here, you will already know that Buddhism has many gods in it, right? There are many deities in Buddhism, but when most people think about Buddhism, they don't think of a deity, right? And they certainly don't think of a creator deity or something like that, right? But she also mentions the subconscious mind. And when she goes on to explain in this video, she talks about the chakras, right? So there are three different systems coming together in her explanation of this practice. Systems we will tease out in a bit, right? Afro-Protestant Christianity, right? Specifically Black Baptist Christianity with some Pentecostal influences. SGI Nichiren Buddhism, and American metaphysical religion, right? What we might call this broad stream of American metaphysical religion, which we will talk about in 1 second. So Woodlawn Missionary Baptist Church, the church that Tina grew up going to and where I did archival research. And for the students, if you ever get the one good thing about academia, somebody will always pay for you to do something. I went to Tennessee, spent 2 weeks going to this church in their archives, meeting people who knew her. Some of the people who she went to school and church with are still alive, they're still there. And it was important to capture their stories, right? Because they're all like she was, right? They're in their 80s, and some of them are passing away. Then we will talk about American metaphysical religion, and we will talk about Soka Gakkai. Now in the 40s, when Turner was attending this church, right, the church had become known for its music. Like many Black Baptist churches at the time, they only had one instrument, right? They had a piano. Then things got wild and exciting when they got a tambourine. And then things got even wilder when they got not a drum kit, but one drum. But the church built a name for itself in the area as a hub for musical talent. And out of this same church and community came blues artists, for example, Sleepy John Estes, Tina Turner herself, a trumpet player who Turner knew as a little girl, whose name escapes me now, right? But this church became a hub for that. But it was in this church that she was baptized. And she was introduced to the teaching that she said was the most important teaching of her life to that point, right? The 10 Commandments, specifically as she went through training to be baptized, right? Her father was a deacon in this church, and her mother, her grandmother rather, her father's mother, was what you might call, what scholar Anthea Butler calls, right, a church mother. Now that language comes out of the Pentecostal church, but this is a way, the church mother is a way of naming Black women's religious authority in church, right? In many traditions, as many of you know, right, women are not ordained, right? They're not allowed to be priests or preachers and things like this. This is changing. In some traditions, it's also different. But in the Baptist church, this was the case, for example, when Turner was growing up. So how do we name the authority that Black women so clearly have in these spaces, right? Though they're not speaking from the pulpit, they're not preaching from the pulpit, so they don't have that authority, but they run the church, right? They are the majority of the membership, they direct the choirs, they teach how do we name that authority? Church mothers, right? Anthea Butler's language of church mothers. So Turner's grandmother was that. And she grew up with her grandmother because Turner's parents left to work in a factory in East Tennessee during World War II, right? To contribute to the war effort, if you will. So Turner's training in religion comes largely from her grandmother, centered on this church. And specifically what she took from that grandmother is the importance of prayer and discipline. That to be a good, at that time, Christian woman meant to keep a clean home and an orderly prayer life. And what I want to suggest to you out of this is that when Turner then becomes Buddhist and somebody says to her, chant 2, 3, 4 hours in a day, that was not unusual to her, right? Though the chanting was new, the act of praying for hours at a time, she had learned from her grandmother in this church. Now, the second stream of Turner's religious life that we're calling American metaphysical religion, this may be familiar to many of you, the words may not be, but the actions are. If you've ever been on Twitter, Instagram, or pressing, if you've ever been on X, Instagram, TikTok, and you see these inspirational quotes about your higher mind and your subconscious mind, and you could be anything, live your best life. A lot of that stuff comes directly out of the influences of this stream that we're calling American metaphysical religion. But what I want to name for you is the ways in which Black Southern religious culture of the early 20th to mid 20th century, even today in some ways, is intertwined in many ways and contributed to some of the structuring logics of American metaphysical religion. There is a stream of Black religiosity that womanist theologians like Rosemary Freeney Harding calls the African-American mystical tradition, right? The ways in which in Black Southern religious culture, dreams, omens, signs, visions, things like that, right, influence the way African-American live their lives, even as they intertwine with the structures of institutional Christianity. And this persists even to this day, right? My grandmother, so Chris mentioned that I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and it was affected by Katrina and all that. Well, today's the 21st. Today would have been my grandmother's, I'm not even gonna do math for you. But my grandmother was born in 1936, you can do that math, right? But this would have been her whatever birthday. My grandmother died in Katrina. Right? But before Katrina, right, when the discussion about evacuating came up, my grandmother was paralyzed from the waist down, and she was a disabled rights activist in New Orleans. So my grandmother, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for, she is the reason, for example, that the sidewalks in New Orleans are ADA compliant, that there are ADA bus routes in New Orleans. My grandmother led that effort. Right? So she's a wonderful, wonderful person. But before Katrina, my mom said, are you going to evacuate? My grandmother was very sick and had all these problems. And my grandmother said, you know, Lila, I had a dream. And I'm not gonna make it through this storm. And I don't wanna fight, and I don't wanna, you know, go through all of this, but you go and you live and you survive, right? So dreams, omens, signs, vision, all remain a significant part of African-American religiosity. Jumping more broadly, you could say that the obsession that many people have with astrology, for example, and divination practices, also deeply indebted to this stream of American metaphysical religion. And for Turner, this stream enters her life, the dreams of her maternal grandmother, but really in 1966, she goes to London, she's with Ike, her ex-husband Ike Turner, they have this big fight. She shows up for rehearsals for a TV show, right? And she shows up to rehearsal and her face is dark and she has all this stuff. And the woman says, Tina, let me talk to you. I know a man that you should meet, right? And he was an astrologist. And the astrologist told Turner that one day you will be among the biggest of stars and your partner will fall away like a leaf from a tree, right? And she held on to that for the rest of her relationship with Ike Turner, those words, right? So what I'm naming for you here is that's the beginning for Turner of her involvement with psychics, astrologers, and various kinds of divination practices. And in her own words, these practices gave her hope. All predisposing her, I would argue, for in 1972, when she first encounters Soka Gakkai Nichiren Buddhism, she's primed for it. You see what I'm saying, right? She has this training from her childhood of intense prayer and spirituality and spiritual discipline. She already knows, right, that there are deeper ways, or if not deeper, at the very least different ways of looking at reality. And if you get into some of those deeper ways, they may even help you in life, right? She's already getting that from American metaphysical religion. such that when her son comes home, right, first a recording engineer tells her, Tina, you don't have to deal with Ike. You should try this chanting. And Tina says, I don't do witchcraft. That's witchcraft, and I'm not doing it. Right? But then her son comes home with prayer beads. And he says, Mom, right here in Inglewood, actually, this story is deeply rooted in Los Angeles. Right here in Inglewood, her son comes home with lacquered prayer beads. And he says, Mom, the people down the street say, if you do this practice and you hold these beads and you say these words, you'll be able to have anything you want. So you should come with me. And she says, son, I don't know about all that. You go, though. You go, chant, live your best life. But I don't know about all that, right? But then the third time, a woman comes to her who actually is introduced to her through Ike. And she was a woman who actually sold drugs to Ike Turner. It's the 70s. Comical, you know. So the woman tells Ike, chanting is really cool. Ike says, yeah, go tell Tina all that. So she goes to tell Tina about chanting, and Tina realizes that she's talking about the same chant that the recording engineer was talking about, that her son was talking about, and that coming from metaphysical religion, she has this belief in threes, right? She's told by a psychic that if anything that's presented to you in threes, you should pay attention to that. So the third time she hears about chanting, she instead of saying that's witchcraft, I don't do that, she says, well, tell me more about this. And the woman explains to her the history that I'm about to explain to you now, right? Jazz pianist Herbie Hancock joined the Soka Gakkai in Seattle in 1972. He introduces it to his friend, jazz musician Wayne Shorter. Wayne Shorter doesn't begin to practice initially, but his wife, Anna Maria Shorter, does. Anna Maria Shorter is close friends with jazz musician Walter Bishop Jr., a pianist, his wife, Valerie Bishop, the woman who introduces Tina Turner to the practice. Turner, as she said, had to initially teach herself about the practice, right? She didn't have freedom to go to meetings. So she really only starts attending Soka Gakkai meetings in 1976, and that's when she formally converts to Buddhism, right? 1976. But Turner relates an experience where she's chanting, and Ike had forbidden her to chant. Said you can't go to meetings and like all this stuff, you can't do that. So Ike goes out of town, Tina chants in secret. He comes home, discovers her chanting, and she said she turned around and she looked in his eyes, and she had never seen him be genuine, or rather only one other time had she ever seen him be genuinely afraid before, when they were on a plane that was about to go down, right? So up to that point, she saw them, right? Ike's 8 years her senior. She met Ike Turner when she was 16 years old. She was still in high school, right? Then she had a child at 18, not for Ike Turner, but for another musician, right? So from Ike Turner really got her out of high school and really brought her to a new vision of life, right? Not the country and picking cotton. Tina Turner was a sharecropper as a little girl, right? So she picked cotton as a child. Ike Turner introduced her to a world of, nightclubs and performances and music. And she said, I want to do this. I don't want to pick cotton and maybe be a nurse, right? Which is what her mother expected of her. I want to do this. But in so doing, you can see how a 25-year-old man, right? The 16-year-old friend turned girlfriend, you could see how codependency would come out of that. And so she becomes her whole life becomes this man for 16 years. And she had come to believe, in her own words, that he was like God, something. Right? He made their financial decisions. He counted the money. He told her the show is at this time, not at that time. Controlled every aspect of her life. And it seemed to her that he was controlled. That was who he was. Never afraid, always in control. But when she turned around from chanting and saw how afraid he was, that was the beginning for her of realizing, and she says this in her memoir, I, Tina, I realized this man is not God, he's just a person. And I've taken everything from him that a person could take, right? I've had, well, I won't go into the graphic details, right? All these things, and she realizes, I don't have to be afraid of him. What could he do to me short of kill me, right? And if he were going to do that, well then fine, because I don't want to live this life with him anyway. So that moment of seeing him be afraid, of chanting was the beginning of freedom for her. Now, she considered the president of Soka Gakkai, who died also in 2023, right, to be her spiritual mentor. And she learned, as many Soka Gakkai members did, his understanding of Nichiren teachings, right, through his writings, right? Far before she ever met him, she learned through his writings. And throughout her career, then after she left Ike Turner, after their divorce and all this stuff, she expressed this desire to one day be a Buddhist teacher, right? But she said that I am smart enough to know, in her words, this is in the end of her memoir, Itina, she said, I'm smart enough to know that I shouldn't confuse performing with teaching, right? I make my coins, I make my money from performing, and I should keep that separate, but one day I will become a Buddhist teacher. Now, when she releases her Beyond albums, that's when she makes her turn to teaching, right? The first of those albums in 2009, then in 2011, in 2014, and then in 2016. On this first album, she is chanting Buddhist prayers and like giving a kind of Buddhist inflected message. On this album, she's chanting in Sanskrit. It's like an interfaith album, so it brings in Hindu and Islamic influences. On Beyond, she returns to gospel music, including a gospel composition that she herself wrote. And finally, in Awakening Beyond, she recites in English the Heart Sutra. So these four albums then show this range that I'm trying to connect for you of her religious life. And her teachings culminate with then a book-length explanation of the Buddhist teachings that she found most pertinent. So now we will turn from this broader level to the specifics of SGI Nichiren Buddhism. SGI Nichiren Buddhism is a tradition of Nichiren Buddhism, right, founded by this 13th century monk. For the students in here, pop quiz. Anybody taking a Buddhism class in here? Or do you know the Tendai school?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. It's a pop quiz.
We haven't went to Japan yet.
Oh, okay, coming
We
soon.
just finished in China.
Okay,
Not there yet.
Tendai coming soon. Well, Tendai started in China as Tiantai. So you brushed over it a little bit. But Nichiren wrote most of his teachings in the form of letters. And he's a bit of an interesting figure, right? Because he didn't write any, no books, no treatises, no like one source of his doctrines and teachings, right? He writes letters to his followers. And he establishes the widespread practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And he advocated exclusive devotion to the Lotus Sutra, as in don't do anything else, right? His famous teaching was Zen is the work of devils. The esoteric school will lead to the ruin of the nation, right? The Pure Land school leads straight to hell. And then his fourth dictum is that following precepts is the end of religiosity, right? So this is giving you a kind of a little snapshot into his exclusive. When he said chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, he meant that and nothing else, right? That is Nichiren. Sometimes he's compared to, this is a complicated comparison, I don't like it very much, but sometimes people compare him to Martin Luther. Do with that what you will in a Jesuit school. But he advocated, most importantly for us, right? He advocated for the practice of shakabuku, the characters for which mean to break and subdue. Eric can confirm, right? To break and subdue, right? As a method of Lotus Sutra propagation, right? So he argued that to propagate these teachings, you should confront people, right? In argument and break down their views, right? Until they accept the Lotus Sutra as the fundamental teachings, or go to hell. Many people don't even know that Buddhism has hells. Like people say, oh, I like Buddhism because it doesn't have none of those hells and stuff like that. False.
Exactly.
16 hells, and then each hell is in two, right? So 32 hells, and in great detail and description, Buddhists were never more excited than when they were describing hell. When they talk about the heavens, they say, oh, it's pleasant, and you go up there, right? All the description is saved for hell. So Nichiren said that if somebody didn't accept the Lotus Sutra, right, to hell, and they would experience this lifetime after lifetime. Right? So this is giving you a sense of who he is. And he advocated then for the widespread of Lotus Sutra teachings. He inscribed these teachings in a scroll called the Gohonzon that most Nichiren Buddhists have in their homes. Now, why that history is important for us is because Kozen Rufu and Nichiren's idea of Shakubuku is how this organization, Soka Gakkai, eventually is formed in Japan and spreads around the world. Right now, Soka Gakkai means, it's a neologism that means like value creating or value creation study association, study body, if you will. So it's founded by this man who is in the main an educated Western. And that's important because central to Soka Gakkai's teaching is the educational spread of the Lotus Sutra, right? Which has also led then to the founding of universities, one of which is not far from here in Elisa Viejo, Soka University of Japan. Now, it's the third president of Soka Gakkai that really spreads the organization around the world. So if the first president founds it, the second president solidifies its doctrine, the third spreads that doctrine around the world, but crucially changes it. Initially, in an encounter that happens here in the United States, right, in Chicago, where he witnesses the racial discrimination against a little Black boy in a park in Chicago, and he decides from that moment that he has to make social issues, right, central to how Soka Gakkai doctrine and Nichiren's doctrine is understood. Now, Turner, as I said, joined Soka Gakkai in 1973. These are photos of her chanting at home. I love this look in her eye. She's looking at you like, I know something you don't know. Which is why I titled the talk, The Secret Counter. Can you think of it? Fundamental to Soka Gakkai, probably their most unique doctrine. Much of Soka Gakkai doctrine, like much of Nichiren doctrine, comes out of the Tendai school, right? Kind of transformations and commentaries on the Tendai school. But what's uniquely Soka Gakkai is their idea of human revolution, right? Maybe since you're about to go to Japan, can you read that for me?
Yeah. Based on the philosophy and practice of Nichiren's teachings, the Soka Gakkai advocates for individual inner reformation it calls human revolution, the ultimate goal of which is a peaceful world and the happiness of humanity. It upholds the Lotus Sutra philosophy that all people inherently possess within them the Buddha nature, the potential for enlightenment, and can bring it forth through Buddhist practice. Based on this teaching, the Soka Gakkai has been endeavoring to establish the sanctity of life and the dignity of humanity as fundamental universal ideals. The Soka Gakkai does not view Buddhism as an exclusively spiritual or metaphysical pursuit, but as an applied philosophy of life. It encourages Buddhist practice as a means for people to develop the character, wisdom, and strength to improve themselves and their circumstances, to contribute to society, and to help bring about happiness and peace in the world.
In short, this is the Soka Gakkai's way, thank you, of referring to awakening. A standard Buddhist notion of buddhi or awakening, the Soka Gakkai changes that notion slightly puts it in a modernist lens and language and calls that human revolution. And so if you look up Soka Gakkai, for example, if you hear Soka Gakkai members talk, Soka Gakkai is huge here in Los Angeles. Its largest center outside of Japan really is here in Los Angeles, right? And the headquarters for SGI USA are in Santa Monica. So this idea, this is what you will hear from a Soka Gakkai member. You won't really hear a Soka Gakkai member talk about awakening so much, which is why in Tina Turner's teachings, you don't really hear her say the words awakening or enlightenment too much, but you will hear this concept, right? So this is the most distinctive doctrine of that organization. Now, this takes us into the technical weeds. Ishin sounds like I can feel Eric breathing. Whenever this notion comes up, is vast, right? But the key point for us is that this doctrine, that for every moment of life or mind, there are 3,000 possible realms. But the key in this doctrine is that this means that anybody in any condition of life, say hell, right, in abject suffering, can bring forth awakened potential from inside of their life. So this doctrine explains how awakening or enlightenment is possible. Now, Nichiren taught that this doctrine is expressed in Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, so that the minute somebody says Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, they become, at that very moment, an awakened being. So then the practice starts from the understanding that you are awakened and works from there. So you're not trying to become awakened, right? It starts from the idea that you are awakened, and then you enact that awakening in the world, right? That's what's key for us. Changing poison into medicine. The idea, as Soka Gakkai defines it, the principle that earthly desires and suffering can be transformed into benefit and enlightenment by virtue of the power of the law, right? Often cited to show that you can transform anything, right? In Turner's teachings, she says this is the most important teaching in her life. Right? So what then does Tina Turner emphasize, right? In her teaching, she emphasizes first letting go. She tells people that the first thing that they need to do is to let go of anything that is holding them back. And as she says, right, your husband, well, I excerpted that out. I don't want people to just go around leaving their partners in context. But she says anything, clergy, spouse, family, anything that's holding you back, you should let those things go. Because when you're free, your true creativity, your true self comes out. But then she qualifies. She says, but you might not be able to stand who your true self is, right? And so she says that before you do that, you need to understand who you are, right? What you're working with, what you're dealing with. That's the first thing. The second thing she emphasizes is the subconscious mind, right? And Turner says, much as she explained to Larry King, that the subconscious mind is the site where her Baptist training comes together with her Buddhist practice. And so she says, bless you, that she can relate to the 10 Commandments and the 10 worlds of Buddhism equally, right? It's all the same for her, as long as you contact the subconscious mind, because that's where the coin of the Almighty is, right? So you can see this is an echo of the same language that she was using with Larry King Live. And this is a photo, I won't tell you how I obtained it. It came by various means, you might say. This was Turner's prayer room in Switzerland, right? This was her altar in Switzerland. She emphasizes that Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is like a song, right? And when you sing that song, when you chant, you contact the subconscious mind, right? So again, the subconscious mind, a major theme for her. All of this leads to what she calls the space of beyond. That meditation and prayer and chanting puts you in a state, right, beyond the conscious mind. But for Turner, beyond becomes a social location as well. So drawing off of Rumi, right, that beyond for Turner is a state beyond suffering, right, beyond social discrimination and these kinds of experiences, right? Beyond is that state that you touch and then you were able in your life to reach for more, right? This is central to her teaching. So I want to conclude the talk portion, and I know we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, but I want to conclude with, I think, 3 or 4 things that Turner as a case study for American religious history, African American religion, and Black Buddhism can teach us. The first is that Turner's engagement with psychics, astrologers, and the stream of American metaphysical religion demonstrates what underlies much of today's, for example, spiritual but not religious ideology. That's the first thing that she teaches us. The second is that Turner's practice of Buddhism challenges the still pervasive assumption that African American religiosity equals Christianity, and specifically equals Baptist or Pentecostal Christianity. That has never been true, right? Through the work of, for example, Professor Amir Hussain, right? In his book, Muslims and the Making of America, right? He showed that some research demonstrates that maybe some 10 to 50% of the bondspeople who were brought to this country, right, from Africa, may have been Muslim. Right? So African American religion has never equaled Black Baptist Christianity, ever. Right? So Turner expands that for us by adding Buddhism to the fold, right? Buddhism is an African American religion as well. African Americans have been engaging with Buddhism since the late 19th century, we can say, definitely since the 20th century, early 20th century in Harlem. Tina Turner participates directly in that. Turner's role as a Black Buddhist teacher, right, which she turns to later in her life, and the teachings that she emphasizes expands the canon of Black Buddhist teachings, right? We can talk about that in the Q&A. And finally, Turner naming herself as a Buddhist Baptist highlights what scholar Rima Vesely-Flood says, that Black Buddhists often do not entirely forsake their connection to their prior religious commitments, right? And so to study Black Buddhism is also then to ask sets of questions about other religious traditions that African American, that those converts may have come from, right? In Turner's case, the Black Baptist tradition. So I'm going to stop there and I'll open it for Q&A. Thank you for your kind attention. I don't know what's happening in Zoom world, but I will leave that. I'll let them. So any questions, comments, yours, or concerns from the room? I don't know if something's in the chat. Yes.
Does it make sense to imagine, or is there scholarship around the metaphysical influence of someone like Tina's grandmother, going back to Africa and religions and religious sensibility that people brought with them? And how much did the African influence writ large in the American metaphysical situation, you know, has any scholarship been done on that?
Yes, so two scholars in particular come to mind. One, the late great Albert Rabateau, who just died a couple of years ago, right? Not too long ago.
LMU alum.
Oh,
Yeah.
when you know, you know.
Yeah.
So LMU's finest, Dr. L. Rabateau. He wrote a book called
Slave Religion.
Right? The Invisible Institution. And what he looks at two narratives of African American religiosity. One, that it came from Africa, and like everything that you see is a direct import from that. The other, that connection to West Africa in particular, West and Central Africa, was broken. And he challenges that narrative by saying that, right, like all good scholars would say, like what you should say in your research papers, both and, right? That there are some influences that you can track and see, and there are some disjunctures. And that's just two of the scholars that come to mind. Others would be like Yvonne Chirot in her book, Black Magic, LaShawn Harris, prostitutes, sex workers, number runners, and something else, right? So a lot of scholarship about that. Yeah. Thank you for that question. But what they haven't done though is connect that to this stream. The scholars done the most work on metaphysical religion, two scholars, Courtney Bender, and also up at UC Santa Barbara is, I just had her on the screen, Catherine Albanese, right? So now that work needs to be done of connecting, right, African Americans to that history that they helped create, right? Much of the structuring logics, but as is so often left out of that historical narrative. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
There's a
I
question
have
back
a
there.
question from the Zoom audience. I'm gonna ask them to unmute.
Uh-huh.
Hi. It's low bandwidth. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I lived in a very traditional Zen center, and I found that there was a lot of disparaging related to SGI in the traditional Buddhist world. So can you kind of speak to that? I mean, you've touched on it, but can you speak on that?
Yes, so I would say that, thank you for that question. I would say that a lot of that disparagement stems from three sources. One is class, right? In Japan in 1930 when the organization was founded, but it really comes into its own post-World War II, really, right? When the second president of the organization is released from prison, right? And once he's released from prison, he reconstitutes the organization, but the organization was derided in that wake for being a gathering of the sick and poor, right? Because most of the people that they were pulling from had been very much affected by World War II, lost everything, kind of rebuilding, and this religion comes along and says, you can do this practice and attain your goals and whatnot, right? So the first is class. The second is the idea that you can chant for things that you want, right? And that makes people very uncomfortable, right? It's all good if you say, oh, you pray and it feels good, it makes you feel better, who doesn't like to feel better in life, love that. But when you start saying, you say these words and you can get things, then people get spooked, get freaked out, right? And so that's the second source. Even though this idea, there's a great book called Practically Religious, right? That charts the history of the idea of benefits in Japanese Buddhist tradition. But this goes all the way back to the beginning of Buddhism, right? That's what punya is, merit, right? What you build from good acts, good actions, right? This kind of spiritual bank account. That's what the SGI means when they talk about benefits. The word underlying it, right, is punya, the Sanskrit word. That's the second thing. The third thing is the aggressive conversion tactics. So the part of the story that I didn't tell, Nietzsche and all of that in the 13th century, but for the SGI, particularly in Japan in that post-World War II period, where they didn't just try to convince, oh, please practice with us, it's a good religion, you'll like it. No. Right, they've gone in homes, ripping ancestral family altars out of the home. There was an incident at the Nichiren Shoshu-head temple grounds where they kidnapped, that's what the charge that was made against them. They kidnapped one of the priests and, did a couple things to him. So this is the third source, right? So one, the issue of class. Two, the idea of benefits and kind of the overtones of magic there. And then three, these in their history, aggressive conversion tactics. That underlies a lot of the criticisms they will see. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
You.
Snuck up on you. Hi. We have some questions in the chat as well.
Okay, I'll try to answer them quickly.
Just one. What are your thoughts on the cult dynamic in Buddhism, and did they come into play in her journey with it?
That's a very good question. I will answer this very quickly. We have to distinguish two uses of cult, right? Maybe even three. Historical usages, pejorative usages, right? When people say anything, somebody like, what is it called? A religion you don't like, right? If it seems weird and you don't like it, you call it a cult, right? A student, for example, was telling me how we were talking about Scientology, how you get these billion-year soul contracts. And the student was like, that's absurd. And I was like, heaven much? A billion years, right? It doesn't really matter, right? But this long contract that you make, heaven, right? No, they're not equivalent concepts. That wasn't my point. My point was that, right, anything that you don't like tends to be called cult, right? And then the third usage would be like new scholarship coming out, new ways of talking about cults. So when people talk about like the kind of charismatic leadership of the now deceased president of Soka Gakkai and things like that. The way that Tina Turner dealt with that is when the organization Soka Gakkai split from its parent temple, the temple lineage, Nichiren Shoshu, and that's what she was referencing in the Larry King Live video when she said Nichiren Shoshu. When that split happened, Turner distanced herself from the whole thing, right? She kept doing her practice, kept her connection to members, but she stopped dealing with the two organizations until they worked it out. And they never really worked it out. But now where they land, right, is that the Soka Gakkai and its former parent temple, they have no relationship to each other. And at that time, then Tina Turner rejoined the Soka Gakkai fold. So I hope that answers your question in brief. I think we have to stop. But thank you all for your, this is at 1:15, right? 1:15-ish. Okay. Well, I thank you all for your kind attention.